Earls case. So if you haven't seen my previous video about Tony Earls, breaking bond, and the politics surrounding this case, please go back and watch it, as it is important context for why we're even here to begin with. Hi, my name is Stevie, and this is my recap on day one of the Tony Earls case. It's important to note that I am not a lawyer. What I am is I'm nosy, and I go digging for stuff. And luckily, in the state of Texas, all of our laws are online. And the first day of the trial is opening statements from both the prosecution and also the defense. Also, we hear from Officer Stevens, who was the on-site patrolman, and also we hear a little bit from Arlene Alvarez's father. And before we get started, also, I want to remind you that it's the prosecution's job to prove their case, that Mr. Earls definitively committed the crimes as stated in the indictment. Now, I'm going to put the indictment on the screen, and you're probably going to need to pause it and enlarge it and turn it to the side. I couldn't figure out how to do it another way. Sorry, I'm not a tech genius. But take a look at the scratch outs on the indictment. I've looked at lots of cases, particularly the ones that Breaking Bond has covered, and this is the first time I've ever seen scratch outs like this in handwriting and pen. And for me, that's indicative of the sloppiness of this case and this indictment when it was brought to the grand jury by Kim Ogg. And it, to me, is just, again, it's a red flag. I have not seen scratch outs and write-ins in this manner before. And again, this to me is indicative of the sloppiness of Kim Ogg's office at the time, and also her rush and desire to secure an indictment for political reasons. So as I said, the prosecution has to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense's job is basically to point out and highlight any reasonable doubt. And any amount of reasonable doubt is enough for the jury. If they are operating under the law, they should be acquitting. So keep all of that in mind as we go through this. Now I'm going to take you through my thinking and my process, and I'm going to start with the points of law that caught my attention. One of the first things is general defense of criminal responsibility, mistake of fact. The important part about this is, to me, the last part, where it says, if this person was not mistaken, would they have been held criminally liable? The next slide is justification to exclude criminal responsibility. And basically it says that you have a right to try to retrieve your property. I've underlined the important parts. Basically justification to retrieve or get back your property. Force can be used to prevent or to respond immediately. Immediate pursuit, fresh pursuit of the person who just stole your property. So again, these are the things that popped out to me within the law. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I am literate. Now, the opening statement from the prosecutor basically sets up, what was the family doing before they arrived at the bank. They tell you a little bit about them, their family life. They were going to eat dinner that night. It was Valentine's Day. Arlene had given her father a gift. They were going to Spanky's. He needed to stop by the ATM to put some money in the bank. And the prosecution sets up basically what happened. Mr. Earls and his wife were robbed, and he fired a couple of shots at the person as they were running away. And then he says basically that he turned into John Wick, was reckless, and he used the word reckless in his opening statement because if you remember the indictment did have written in reckless, if I'm not mistaken. So it seems as though the prosecution's case is going to hinge on him being reckless, which led to the death of Arlene Alvarez. He makes it clear that, and you will hear this probably throughout the case, that Mr. Earls had every right to shoot at the robber. That is not in question. None of that is in question on either side. He absolutely shot at the robber. And the defense comes and says basically the same thing. Yes, we know there's a robbery, was shooting, and that Mr. Earls had every right to do what he did as far as shooting after the robber. The defense highlights and focuses on the fact that the crime scene unit was not properly secured. And I think the reason they're doing that is because the prosecution is basically trying to say that, Mr. Earls, the robber, did not shoot at Mr. Earls, and therefore the additional shots and the fear of his life or whatever it is was not real, and that the shots that were fired into the truck were not legal, not warranted, because there was no real threat because the shooter didn't shoot. The defense is basically saying, y'all don't know the shooter didn't shoot because y'all didn't secure the whole crime scene for a variety of reasons. So again, all the defense has to do is confirm reasonable doubt. That is it. That is it. The prosecution has to prove their case definitively beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, this video got way longer than I initially thought, so this will be day one, part one of the video. And let me know what your thoughts are so far. If you have any questions, hopefully the slides were readable. But yeah, follow me and be on the watch for the next video, part 2 of day 1.